Hello and welcome to IDP's IELTS Advantage session. In this session we're going to tell you a lot about IELTS, and for those of you who don't know very much, we'll be able to explain what IELTS is and what you can expect when you do an IELTS test. I am the IELTS expert, so I should be able to answer your questions, and if I can't answer them, I'll tell you where to find the information. IELTS was the first English language test with an international focus. What does that mean? It means that all accents, American accents, English accents, Australian, New Zealand, are acceptable. American and English spellings are acceptable. The pronunciations of different words in American English or Australian English are acceptable. For example, if I say advertisement, that's an Australian or a British pronunciation. But if an American were to say that word, they'd say advertisement. They're both okay in IELTS. If I was to spell the word colour, I would say O-U-R. But if an American did that, he would say O-R. They're both okay. In an IELTS test, you'll hear different accents. In the listening test, you'll hear different accents from different parts of the English-speaking world. In IELTS, there is also a variety of question types, not just multiple choice question types, but different types of question for the reading, the listening, the speaking, and the writing. It covers a broader range of question types. You can do IELTS in virtually every country of the world, and some of you will have done it. In 1,000 locations across the world, wherever you do the IELTS test, it's the same test. If you did the test in a country where people spoke very good English, if you did it with a bunch of people who were all getting 8s and 9s, you would get the score that is appropriate to you. If you did it in another country where everyone was getting 4s or 3s, you would still get the same score. It doesn't matter where you do the test or who you do it with, IELTS will simply assess your English language level. You may need an IELTS test for many different reasons: for entering a university, for professional registration, for immigration purposes, for other purposes. IELTS is the one test that is accepted for all those purposes. And one of the reasons it's accepted is that it is a very secure test. People who take your IELTS score know that this is a genuine score, that this score was achieved by you and you only under exam conditions. The other thing about IELTS is that our speaking test is a face-to-face speaking test with a real person in a quiet room. It's a situation where you're able to actually ask the examiner for clarification, for explanation. Later on, we're going to see a candidate who has some trouble explaining what he wants to say, who in fact can't think of something to say in the middle of the test. That's okay. The examiner accepts that and then moves on to something else. This is an important part of the IELTS speaking test. IDP Education is here to support you in your journey with the English language. IELTS Advantage is just one of the ways that we support you. It's designed for people who are new to IELTS, and our aim today is to introduce you to some simple methods of preparation. How can I best prepare for my IELTS test? We'll explain some of the mysteries of what happened on a test day and explain to you what happens when a marker assesses you. There are many questions that test takers ask, and we'll try and answer some of those questions today as well. And we'll give you some tips for getting the best out of this test. So let's talk about preparation to begin with. As I said, IELTS is a test that really assesses your true level of English. And in order to get a better score in IELTS, you need to improve your true level of English. Easier said than done, of course. But in order to do that, you really need to spend a lot of time every day considering where you can get English and where you can use it. The media, of course, is an obvious place. Do you watch news on TV in English? Do you listen to the radio in English? Do you look at newspapers and news magazines in English? These are important sources of English, and the more you read, the more it will help you in every part of your IELTS. It will improve your writing, it will improve your speaking, and it will improve your listening. There are other ways, of course, to access English. There are native speakers of English who are very interested in a particular subject, computers, birds, I don't know, cooking. If you're interested in some of these subjects, join those groups. They will be interested in hearing your opinion about a subject. This is a good way of making friends and a good way of learning English. At home, maybe you live with people who don't speak a lot of English. Well, tell them, let's speak English over dinner. Let's do it at this particular time every day. And of course, the obvious thing is to go to an English class. But a lot of people begin and end there. Some people go to English class and don't use English outside of the classroom. This is a bad policy. You need to take what you learn from the class and use it in your everyday life. There are some things that we can help you with at IDP. One of them is the IELTS Essentials website. There you'll find some tips for improving your English. You'll also find some IELTS preparation materials. We also conduct regular masterclasses. Some of you have been to a masterclass, and that means an hour and a half of information about IELTS for free. Look at the IELTS Essentials website and you'll see when masterclasses are scheduled at a place near you. These usually occur at IELTS test centres, for example. And we also have a service called Writing Assist, where you can write an essay and send it to our English language experts who will provide you with a report that shows where you are strong and where you need to improve in your writing for IELTS. It's important to remember that when you're learning a language, it takes time. It took you time to learn your first language, right? It takes time to learn any language. So don't get discouraged if it's taking longer than you think it should. Some people believe that they can learn everything that they need to in the week or the day before the test. We know that this is not true. It's steady and systematic learning that will lead to success in a test. Some people believe that one day they will get lucky if they just do the test enough times. This is very optimistic, and a lot of people just keep getting the same score every time. So this is what the test looks like. You'll see that there are two versions of the test. IELTS is unique in this way. We offer you an academic version of the test and a general training version of the test. As you can see, it's a big test. It takes about 3 hours to do. That means that everything that you learn in English will help you succeed in IELTS because it covers a lot of ground. The academic test in Australia begins with writing and then moves to reading and then listening, as does the general training test. The speaking component could occur before the written part or it could occur after the written part, depending on which test centre you go to. If you have done the test in another country, you will have done listening as the first part of your written test, followed by reading and then writing. But in Australia, writing is the first part. Academic and general training differ only in the writing and the reading. The listening and the speaking are the same for both versions of the test. You need to decide which version of the test is best for you. Of course, the first thing you need to find out is what does the institution or the professional organisation or the government department who is asking for an IELTS score, which version do they require? It may be that you have no choice, that you must do the academic, but sometimes there is a choice. So find out if there is a choice, and then you decide, well, where are my skills? If you have done a degree where you had to read some serious, detailed English academic texts, you'll find that the academic reading is quite comfortable for you. If you are quite comfortable with interpreting graphs, writing descriptions of charts, then the academic writing will be very suitable for you. But maybe you don't have those skills, so consider doing the general training, if there is a choice. IELTS is based on a 9-band scale. If anyone is 0 in this room, you don't understand anything in fact, you're probably not even here, because a 0 is if you didn't come to the test. A 1 is somebody who speaks no English. 2, nobody in this room, because you wouldn't understand things that I was saying. We get up to band 4 as a limited user. You'd be understanding some of what I said. But you are getting around the band 6 or band 7 or better score. And that means that you are becoming quite a good user of English. Remember that these 9 bands also have half band scores in between. So you may be a 6.5 or a 7.5. That means, in effect, that there are some elements of your language of the higher band and some elements of the lower band. I like to think I'm a band 9, but that's because I've been speaking English for about, when did I start? About 58 years, all right? So I should be an expert, okay? How is each skill assessed? In the writing, as I said before, you have 60 minutes to show how you can write. You are asked to write 150 words for task 1 and 250 words for task 2. Please write at least 150 and at least 250, because if you don't, you'll be penalised. But don't write too many more words than that. Task 1 is only half the value of task 2. In other words, task 2 is 2/3 of the writing score. In reading, you are asked to read 3 long passages in academic and 6 short passages in general training. The type of reading that you do in academic reading is something like you would see in a serious English language newspaper or news magazine. So if you're not reading that type of material now, please begin to do that. It will help you. In general training, the type of reading is less academic. It may be a list of rules, some instructions, it could be a bunch of advertisements. It's the sort of stuff you might find in your letterbox when you go home. The advertisement from a local supermarket, for example. So read that sort of thing. In listening and in speaking, of course, there is no difference between academic and general training. In the listening, there are 4 sections. In the first section, 2 people will be having a conversation about an everyday topic. In the second section of the listening, there will be 1 person talking, a recorded piece of information, perhaps a news broadcast. The third section of the listening will be 2 people or 3 talking again about a subject which is related to study. In the fourth section, there will be a lecture that you have to listen to. The listening becomes progressively more difficult. There are 40 questions, and each of these questions is worth 1 mark. In speaking, there are 3 distinct sections, and you can practice these sections. In the first section, you talk about everyday events and interests. In the second section, you are asked to speak for 2 minutes. And in the third section, you enter into a discussion with your examiner. I've talked to a lot of test takers around the world, and they ask me many questions. I'm going to share some of those questions with you now. In the writing test, for example, many people ask this question: how many paragraphs should I write? Other people say, can I use the word I in my writing? Can I use capital letters when I write? If I'm given a graph in academic task 1, how do I recognise what the main features are? And if I'm asked a question, do you agree or disagree, in task 2 of a writing test, do I have to give both sides of the argument? You may be surprised at some of the answers. Let's look at the first question. How many paragraphs should you write? Well, there is no set rule. It may depend on the question you're being asked. If you're asked a fairly simple question like, to what extent do you agree or disagree, then you may be able to only write about 3 paragraphs. Introduction, I agree for these reasons, and conclusion. If you're asked another question like, discuss both of these views and give your own opinion, then this may take more paragraphs to do. The important thing is you should use paragraphs, but don't use too few and don't use too many. Each paragraph should have a topic sentence, and when you've dealt with that topic, you should move on to another paragraph. If, for example, you're making 3 important points, that's probably 3 paragraphs. I would say, as a rule of thumb, as a general rule, no fewer than 3 and no more than 6 paragraphs. Can you use the first person I in an academic or general training task 2 essay? The answer is yes, please do. Because in the essay, you are asked to give your opinion and to use examples from your experience. So how are you going to do it without using the word I? The examiner wants to hear your opinion. The worst thing that you can do is to say there are 2 sides to every coin, that there are many different opinions, and never give your own opinion. Say what you think. An IELTS essay is not the same as an essay you write at university. Can I write my essay in all capital letters? The answer is yes, you can. And in fact, I would recommend that you did if your handwriting is very bad, because the examiner needs to be able to see that you can spell, needs to be able to understand what you're writing. Remember though, if you're using all block letters, make sure it's clear where one sentence begins and another sentence ends. That means use your full stops and make them clear. This question about academic task 1, you look at a graph, you look at a chart. How can you tell what is important and what is not important? Well, this takes experience. If you read regularly, if you read a serious English language newspaper, news magazine, go to the business section. Have a look at the charts. If you're reading a popular science magazine, go to the charts that talk about the trends and tendencies in science. If you're reading something about economics, look at those charts, look at those graphs. The more you do that, the more you will be able to understand those things. As a rule, there may be 4 or 5 main trends, similarities. There'll be 1 or 2 things that are opposite to the main trend. So look for those things. Do you need to give both sides of an argument in an agree or disagree question? Well, no, you don't, because you're not asked to give both sides of the argument. If, for example, the task 2 question is, this is what is happening. Is it a good thing or a bad thing? You can answer that question by saying it's a good thing for these reasons. You could probably get up to an 8 doing that. The examiner, though, will say, well, could something more be added in order to give a 9? And in that case, it's probably a good idea to mention the opposite opinion as well. But this is only up in the 8 and 9 area, okay? You can answer the question very well without giving the opposite opinion. Let's look at reading now. And these are some of the questions that I've been asked by candidates about reading. How do you choose what to read when you're practicing? Do the answers come in the same order as the questions in reading? What if I'm not sure if it's this answer or that answer? I put them both down. What happens? And how many correct answers do I need for a band 6 or a band 7? Let's look at them. If you're reading a lot, this in itself is good. If you're only reading material that is related to your study, this is not so good. You need to broaden your reading. The sort of reading that you find in an academic reading test is the sort of reading you will find in a serious news magazine or a serious English language newspaper. It'll be people talking about an issue, introducing it, saying how many problems or points of interest there are there, giving some solutions, and then concluding. Do you see that the pattern, the design, the plan for these types of passages is very similar, no matter what the topic is? So the more of that sort of thing that you read, the better. It's not so much the content, but the style of the reading. So I recommend that you read widely and you read serious English language news magazines and special interest magazines, New Scientist, Economist, magazines like that. The questions in reading usually come in the same order as the answers. So if you find the answer to question 25 in the middle of your passage, then generally speaking, the answer to question 26 will come soon after. Except if the question type is a matching question type, right? Match the heading with the paragraph. Of course, these can't come in the same order because that would be giving the answer away. But if it's a true-false not given, if it's a multiple choice type of question, the answers will come in the same order. This is an important thing to know because if you scan your text and find the answer to the first question, then you know you don't have to read before, you can just read after. That means instead of reading 2,500 words in your reading test, you might be able to read just 1,800 words. This means that you'll be able to do it more quickly. What if you put down 2 answers to the one question? This is a problem because even if one of those is correct, they will both be marked wrong. If there's anything that looks confusing or ambiguous, if it's not clear what your answer is in the reading, then it will be marked wrong. This means also that if you write your answer and it's not very clear, that will be marked wrong. How many correct answers do you need to get a band 6? Well, for an academic test, you'll need about 23 correct answers for a band 6. For a general training, you'll need about 30 correct answers. So the listening test, here are some of the questions that I've been asked. It's the same question as for the reading. Do the answers come in the same order as the questions? The answer is a little bit different. Do you have to use capital letters for names? If you use a singular noun in your listening answer and the answer is plural, is that wrong? Is spelling important? As we saw before, in listening it is always true that the answers come in the same order as the questions. And this is important because in listening you only hear the recording once. That means you don't get another chance to hear the information if you've missed it. Having the answers come in the same order as the questions means that you can tell where you are in the listening. I just heard the answer to question 23, therefore question 22 has gone and question 24 is coming up. Capital letters for names are not important. You can write the name of a country, the name of a person using small letters and it will be marked correct. If you write down dog instead of dogs or ship instead of ships, this is a problem. Remember, you've got to be careful about grammar answers. If you're filling in the blank in a diagram, for example, in the listening test, it's important that the plural is correct. Is spelling important? Yes. If you don't spell a word correctly in your reading or in your listening, you will not receive any marks for that. So that means one of the things you need to do when you finish your test is to check for spelling. In the listening, of course, you have to rely on your own ability to spell because you can't see the word, you only hear it. In the reading, you will always be able to check the spelling from the passage. So there is no excuse for a spelling mistake in the reading test. Before we look at the speaking frequently asked questions, let's look at an example of a speaking test. Here, the test taker is doing part 3 of the speaking test. Part 3 is where the test taker discusses issues with the examiner. The examiner asks for examples and reasons and justifications for what the test taker thinks. This candidate that we're going to watch gets a 5.5 overall. He gets a 6 for his fluency, a 6 for his lexical resource, his use of vocabulary. He gets a 5 only for his grammar and a 5 for his pronunciation. Let's watch now.
We've been talking about a well-known person that you like or admire, and I'd like to discuss with you one or two more general questions related to this. So let's consider, first of all, famous people in your country, in India. You were talking about your father, that he was a famous person, but what other kind of person becomes famous in India?
Like, ma'am, it depends on your work or everything, whatever you will do, which will give you famous in your country. Like, we have a person which we call Naveen Jindal. He's the candidate of Congress party. He's really famous in my country. We can say, like, he's from my state, but he's really famous in my whole country because he's really good social worker. He's always helping to poor people. Like, all the time, he's wherever any people needs, he helps them. And hopefully he will be next Prime Minister of India.
And are there any other people apart from politicians who are famous in India?
Like, there's some other people, like some of the heroes, players. So, like, if we can talk about Sachin Tendulkar, he's really famous because he's really good player as well. He's well known in all of the worlds. Like, we can say about some singers and players and actors, they are famous as well.
If you think about people who are famous today, and think about people who were famous in the past, how are they similar and different?
Can you repeat your question?
You've been talking about famous people in today's society. If we then think about people who were famous in the past, how are they the same or different?
Actually, there are some people, they were famous in past they did something in the past. Some people, they are doing now really good, they are but we can't say, probably I agree with this thing that like this both, there is some different, they did something different in their past according to that time.
What sort of things did they do
Like
in the
some,
past?
like that time, because or if we see our country, there are some person like Mahatma Gandhi, Subhash Chandra Bose. They were the really good politician because they did help to get our country freedom. That's why they were really famous. And now some new peoples who are coming and they are doing something different. They are developing more and more industries, more jobs for people. That's why they are famous now.
And what about the future? What kind of person do you think might become famous in the future?
I think in future they will be, most famous will be like this all players, and some of the people who are doing social workers, they are doing something for society, they will be famous in future.
What sort of things will they do for society?
They will do, like, I hope they will they will provide all of the facility of the people. Like there will be school, college in all of these societies. They will provide all of the facility in transport system, and that's all.
Let's talk about being in the public eye now.
Yeah.
There are lots of people who are famous. What do you think are the advantages in being famous and the disadvantages in being famous?
Actually, it's really good if you are famous. Everyone like to be famous. So because you will be really famous, you will have a lot of money, you will have really good name, and wherever you will go, there will be always welcome of you. I don't think so there will be any disadvantage of to be famous.
In India, how do the media report on famous people?
In India, media, like if there's something little bit thing happen, they make it really big and try to show more and more on TV and encourage people more and more about these things.
Well, thank you very much, Belle. That's the end of the speaking test.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Thanks. Have a good time.
So what are the questions that people ask about the speaking test? What if you don't know any native speakers? How can you prepare? What about, can you ask the examiner a question? I've already really answered that for you. If I'm describing something from my own culture, can I use a word from my own culture? Can I look at my notes in part 2? In part 2, remember, you have to make some notes and then you have to speak. And in part 2, do you have to address all of the bullet points in the task card? I think you can probably guess the answers to all of these questions. We've already talked about how you might practice your English by joining groups with common interests, but have you ever thought about going onto the internet and sharing in people's blogs, in adding your comments to things, by listening to radio broadcasts and reading the transcripts? You can find this in many places on the internet. All of those resources are the next best thing to talking to native speakers, but they can also help you meet native speakers. If I was learning English, I would go to the supermarket and I would make sure that I asked people, where is the tea? How much does this thing cost? Or I can't find something else. Can you help me? Of course, I go to the supermarket and I don't say a word. I can just get what I want off the shelves and I go to the checkout and then pay and then go. Do you do that? I would suggest make every opportunity to use English. Another question that people ask, of course, is can you ask the examiner a question? And I've already answered this. Yes, you should ask the examiner a question. If you don't understand something, ask the examiner to repeat it. Of course, the examiner can't always give you an explanation. In the first part of the test, the examiner can only repeat the question to you. But in the second and third parts of the test, then if you need something explained, please ask for an explanation. Of course, if you're asking for repetition and explanation every minute, the examiner will think, well, maybe your vocabulary is not very good. So don't do it too often, but a little bit is okay. If you're describing something from your own culture, can you use your own word for it? Well, of course you can. Your examiner is somebody who is very comfortable with foreign languages, right? They are all teachers of English as another language, an alternative language. That means they've talked to many people from China, from India, from Thailand, from Korea, from Japan, from everywhere, right? So they're quite comfortable with these things. They've usually travelled. Many of them have lived overseas as well. But if you do use a word from your own language, from your own culture, be prepared to explain what that might mean. If I, for example, am talking about nasi goreng, say, well, that's fried rice in English. Can you look at your notes? Of course you can. That's why you make the notes. But practice making notes. This is an important skill that you need to develop. Practice making good notes. Some people make notes and they write long sentences. This is not the way to make notes. You need to make just little, quick words, dot points that can help you to talk. This is related to part 2 as well. Do you have to cover all of the bullet points in the task card in part 2? In part 2, you're given a task. I want you to describe a person that you know who is successful, for example. Say how you know this person, why he is successful, what other people think about him, for example. Do you have to cover all of those points? The answer is no. It's a good idea to start from those points because that gives you some help. That's the idea of those dot points, to give you some help in answering the question. But if you wanted to talk a lot about how you've met that person and why he's such a good friend, for example, then do that. The examiner is only listening for the quality of your English. Okay, we've talked about some of those frequently asked questions, and now I want to help you prepare for the test day. There are some things that will happen on this day that may surprise you, that you should be prepared for. When you arrive for your test, it's important that we take your photograph. Your photograph will be taken. This is the photograph that will appear on your result. It tells everybody that you are the person who did the test. It's a very important part of IELTS security. And it's one of the reasons why IELTS is so respected around the world. So your photo will be taken and your ID will be checked. So don't forget your passport. Bring your passport. In some countries, your national identity card is enough, but in Australia, it will be a passport. It may be that we will scan your finger. And this is another security feature. And you will have to check in your belongings, your mobile phone especially. You're only allowed to take in with you a pencil and some water in a clear bottle, but nothing very much else. In test centres, you'll be supplied with a pencil. Marking in IELTS. How are you assessed? Well, first of all, the results that you achieve will be sent to you after 13 calendar days. That means if you do the test on a Saturday, you will get your results sent to you Friday week afterwards. On that Friday, you can access online results. You can go to the website and check for your results, get a preview. This is not the official result, but you can see what you scored. You receive a transcript which tells you exactly which score you got for each part of the test, listening, reading, writing and speaking, and an overall score. This will be the average score that you got. And you can have us send your results to 5 different places, to institutions, for example, to the government. Now, what if you think that you did better than your score? What if you think there was a mistake made with your results? Well, you can do things about this. You can apply for an inquiry on results within 6 weeks. If you leave it longer than 6 weeks, you can't ask for a remark. But you can ask for a remark within 6 weeks of the test date. You pay a fee for this, but if your mark is changed, you will get a full refund of that fee. Your script, your speaking test, your reading and listening mark sheet are sent to an examiner, to a marker who does not know what your original score was. So you can be sure that you are being assessed again without any prejudice. Because it may be that another 1, 2 or 3 markers look at your score, this takes time, and the inquiry on results fee covers that time and that cost. Don't worry, the examiners don't know why you are taking the test and why you are asking for a remark and what score you achieved originally. So, that concludes what I want to tell you. Are there any questions? Yes, you do. You can't just do one part of the test again. You have to do the whole lot. Every IELTS test is different from the one before, okay? This is another feature of IELTS. You don't have the same questions again. So you do the test one day, you do it another day, it is a different test. If you change the topic in the middle of the test, in part 2, well, look, it depends how much you change it. As I said before, you don't have to cover all of those bullet points in part 2. If you begin talking about the topic that is given to you and you digress a little bit, you change the topic a little bit, then that's okay. But if the examiner thinks that you are giving a rehearsed speech, right? I'm going to tell you, you ask me about laptops and I'm going to tell you about dogs, right? The examiner will say, well, okay, what you're saying is not relevant. You have practiced this. And in part 3, they will ask you some other questions which make you answer the question, right? So they will say, why do you say that? Oh, no, I didn't ask you that, I asked you that, right? So if it's a natural way of talking for you to add extra information, don't worry about that, that's all right. Any more questions? All right, if there are no more questions, let me just tell you 1 or 2 more things. And they are, your next steps are these. Please go and visit the IELTS Essentials website and get some IELTS preparation resources. You can also join us on Facebook. There you will get some tips for success in IELTS, and you can also ask some questions of our experts. You can find past test papers at IELTS Essentials, and you can find also where you can attend an IELTS masterclass. Again, thank you very much for your attendance and best wishes. Bye-bye.